Hello everyone, this is Scott Weatherly, your regular host on my own today, just dropping you a little bit of a taster of what we are doing on Patreon. In every episode, we cover an extra film, but there's so much more on the Patreon. Julie and I get together and we talk about additional films linked with that main feed. So I wanted to give you a taster to see what's over there. The more discussions we're having, what we're thinking, what we're talking about, so you can then go over there and check it out. Check out our Patreon. Just for $5 a month, you get all these extra podcasts. Not just this, but trekking through the Twilight Zone as well as me giving my 30-minute thoughts on a regular basis, and promotional material regarding both what's coming up on the podcast and other things that we are doing. So please go check out the Patreon. Links are down below. It's at patreon.com/20cg media. That's 20th Century Geek Media. And check this episode out. Enjoy, and I'll see you on the Patreon. Even Ralph sort of has moments of sort of like the way he treats Sarah, sort of like a little bit like, well, you're a woman and, do this, do that. But the real point of this, the real sort of this thing of like, you can explain the sort of the title, the biblical sort of like, thing of the title, because that's where it sort of comes to. But when this Benson guy turns up, all of a sudden it comes about, well, there's two men here. Which one of us is going to get to marry Sarah? And even I'm going like, I didn't even know that was a question. Like that that seems like a really odd thing to get hung up on at this point.
Yeah, you said like, why is there even still marriage,
Yeah.
right? Because, well, keep in mind, like, I mean, you would go full Mad Max. I'd be like, this is the new religion, and
Yeah.
I'm the head of it. We worship pugs.
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, but certain people would say, this has all been predicted by prophecy. I mean, even though religion isn't a big theme here, but um, certain people would fall back on the old ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that those tropes or the ways that they see the world would just give up, would just evaporate. Um, and certain people would become, I mean, it's like fundamentalism, right? I mean, fundamentalism is defined as a reaction against modernity. That's
Mm-hmm.
exactly like you have phones. God didn't want phones. You
Yeah.
have airplanes. God didn't want airplanes. You can see women's ankles. God didn't want that. That was the origin of fundamentalism.
Mm-hmm.
Not to alienate our Christian fundamentalist audience, not that we haven't already by now,
Yeah.
but I mean, that's what fundamentalism is. So I would not be surprised if there was an equal fundamentalist movement sort of in response to the end of the world, right? It's
Quite.
stressful times. But
Yeah.
this isn't really religious. I mean, this is race and, it is still that kind of like old-fashioned stuff. They just want the world to keep going on.
This is social norms rather than
Yeah.
like religious fundamentals. Yeah. I mean, Benson is clearly the more sort of misogynistic of the two,
Yeah.
and he keeps turning. And but what's interesting, and I do find him as an interesting character because he turns up on a boat and he's been tied to the I was gonna say steering wheel, but you know what I mean, the sort of
Mast.
yeah, he's tied himself so he can sort of stay there, and he's obviously been at sea for quite some time. And then when they talk about where he's been, he says that he's been in the Southern Hemisphere and he's been traveling around for the last 6 months. But he had a wife and two children. And after everything happened, he's only just been to where they were living. So you don't know where he was when all these events happened. It never gets clearly explained. But he's been trying to, but he was like, I couldn't face it. I didn't want to see them. And he says, I didn't. I basically sort of, he went there, it was abandoned, and he left, assuming their death. So he's already been married and he's had the family thing. And so I'd say he's definitely more conservative because straight away he's just like, oh, a free white 21-year-old. I think I shall shackle myself to that one. Um, it's within like days of him. No, sorry, within hours of him reviving, it becomes this competition of she is the prize. And
Yes.
it's just this weird, to me, this weird like divergent thing this film takes off on. I'm just like, I'm sorry, I really don't understand this. Like, yeah, all right, so she's attractive, whatever, but like, why is it so like, well, there's two men here and one woman, and she's got to choose, and you're going like, this makes no sense. Why are you trying to break up? You stick together to survive. Like, this is insane.
So you mentioned she's attractive. I mean, just as a side note, one of the things that bothers me most, I'm willing to go along with keeping the old world alive and enjoying these perks and all of that, right?
Hmm.
At least for a while. One of the things that most bothers me is when people like look put together in
Yeah,
a
the whole time.
post-apocalyptic world, right? Where it's
Yeah,
like, at one point he's been hauling up water. So it's like you are a very diligent man to be showering every day in water that
yeah,
you've hauled up, 60 flights or something. Um, it's quite a fall as we hear from the plates. Um, yeah, so they do look entirely too put together in their suits and all this. Um, okay, so let's do the thing that we always do of rewriting.
yeah.
Okay. Uh, in Act Two, with where there's only two characters, Act Two is basically fine.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
needs like two more conversations. It needs, some conversation about like survival and what the future is going to be like, which could be, um, predicated upon the radio transmissions, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But some discussion of the future and long term what their plans are. Does it make sense? What does marriage even matter? This kind of thing. Um, and then there needs to be some sort of mention of giving him internal Othello like space to wrestle with race and just kind of give a line or two that kind of explains a little more why he's so reluctant, right? Um, okay, but basically that whole middle section is fine.
Hmm.
Not the best thing ever, but it's good. I'm willing to go along with, you know, these problems of not being as focused on survival. Right. When the third man arrives and he revives, it just takes a left turn and it just keeps veering in that direction until it comes up with this nonsense conclusion. And all of that just needs to go. Right?
Yeah,
Like that just needs to go right away. Um, he needs to be the catalyst um for Ralph, the Harry Belafonte character, getting his shit together and really making a decision. And instead, you think that's what it's going to be at first, right? Because it's like, oh, now I've got a rival for the girl who I clearly have feelings for, but am reluctant to express anything. And maybe that could be race. It could also be what is the point of having children or having a relationship in this doomed world. I mean, you know, I'd like a few lines there, but that's basically fine. But having a rival should be a reason for you to come out of your shell, right?
mm,
And finally make your feelings known. Instead, he retreats completely.
yeah.
It just says, "I'm right, Mr. Misogynist. You take her." And then she's totally triggered by that, understandably so. Um, and then the sort of like misogyny, you know, uh, version of the Rachel argument comes out, which is interesting and good. I do like that stuff, but you know, turning a brave post-apocalyptic movie starring a black man as the lone male survivor of the human race for a
Yeah.
while, a brave movie into a pathetic love triangle,
Oh.
is not the smartest.
The thing I thought about with this, as I was watching it, we've talked about this sort of, we mentioned, I mean, we will get to in a future episode, the Will Smith I Am Legend. So, there's those comparisons with the views of New York, the use of the mannequins, and, so he's got someone to talk to, all that kind of stuff, which I kind of get. When it gets to the end, though, two things sort of like sprung up in my head as I was watching this. You said about we're rewriting it. This Trinity doesn't work. There are too few people in this to create a suitable amount of tension because, as you say, like the natural survival instinct just tells you we've got to stick together on this to
Yeah.
survive. Like we've got to do our thing. So that sort of like makes total sense, right? That's what it should be. Um, So that's where I'm like, this is silly. This is kind of annoying me. But the thing that I thought about is this needs like a group of people. Like, it doesn't have to be a massive group, you know, and that's where you get that actually the tension between Ralph and Ben should be about the direction that the group goes in. Now, it could be represented by who ends up with Sarah, because that becomes almost like king and queen or whatever of the group kind of thing, you know. And as soon as my head went to that, I was like, oh, this is Rick and Shane from Walking Dead.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And that's what I was like. I ended up basically writing in my head Walking Dead. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, that's why the first season, the first season works, and that I like actually, the first and second season of that. But I was like, oh yeah, that's why that tension between those two works, is because it's actually about direction of the group as well as having sort of relations with the main female lead.